In the suffocating silence of the jungle, Daniel stumbled forward, his once pristine clothes now torn and muddied from weeks of aimless wandering. The betrayal still burned in his chest like acid, the faces of his family, their cold eyes and calculated words haunting his every step. He had fled without direction, without purpose, carrying only the weight of their treachery. Rain pounded mercilessly as lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating what seemed impossible. A cabin, weathered yet intact, nestled among ancient trees. Inside, time stood suspended. A lantern burned with unwavering flame. On a wooden table lay an open journal, its pages yellowed but legible, containing entries dated 50 years prior. Beside it, a photograph of a man with Daniel's face. The first journal entry chilled him. "Today my family betrayed me. I escaped into the jungle. Could this cabin be more than shelter? Perhaps the answer to a mystery spanning generations? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." The silver-framed fountain pen sat untouched on Daniel's mahogany desk, a gift from his father on the day he had taken over as CEO of Blackwood Architectural Solutions, the sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner. Office caught on its engraved surface. To shape the future, one must honor the past. 6 months before his disappearance, Daniel had signed the quarterly reports with that very pen, unaware of the hushed conversations happening just down the hall. He rolled back in his leather chair, loosening his tie as he gazed at the Chicago skyline, a canvas partially of his own creation. 3 Blackwood buildings stood prominently among the steel and glass forest, each a testament to his family's 70-year legacy. "The Henderson proposal looks promising," Eleanor said, entering without knocking, as had become her habit after 30 years of marriage. Her tailored pantsuit and practical bob reflected the efficiency that had made her the company's most formidable operations director. Daniel nodded, pushing the thick folder aside. "The sustainability elements need work. Marcus should revisit the energy systems." Eleanor's smile tightened slightly. "He's already reworked them twice. The client loves the current design. The client doesn't understand the long-term implications of cutting corners on renewable integration." Daniel stood, moving toward the wall of family photographs. "My grandfather built this firm on the principle that we don't just build for today." The largest photo showed 3 generations of Blackwood men at the groundbreaking of their first international project. Daniel's grandfather, Robert, stood tall, despite his 80 years, one hand on the ceremonial shovel, the other on young Marcus's shoulder. Daniel stood between them, the bridge connecting past and future. "The board meeting has been moved up," Eleanor mentioned, her tone deliberately casual. "Sophia suggested we discuss the Asian expansion before quarter's end." Something in her delivery made Daniel turn. "Move to when?" "Tomorrow morning. I put it on your calendar." "Without consulting me first. I'm flying to Boston tomorrow to meet with the Historical Preservation Committee." Eleanor shrugged. "Marcus can handle Boston. This meeting is more important." The first subtle warning bell chimed in Daniel's mind. "Since when does my son make executive decisions about the Harrington restoration? That project is personal." "Nothing in this company should be personal, Daniel. That's business fundamentals." The fountain pen gleamed accusingly as Daniel returned to his desk. He picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. "Have Marcus and Sophia been meeting with Reynolds Group?" "Their representative was in the building yesterday." The momentary flicker in Eleanor's eyes told him everything. "It was a preliminary discussion about potential collaboration. Reynolds has been trying to acquire us for a decade, and your stubborn refusal to even discuss options has limited our growth potential." Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. "The world is changing. We can't remain tethered to your grandfather's outdated vision forever." Daniel carefully returned the pen to its holder. Schedule a private dinner tonight. Just family. We clearly need to talk. That evening, in the formal dining room of their lakeside home, the fountain pen sat at Daniel's place, setting instead of silverware, a silent statement that made Marcus shift uncomfortably, and Sophia check her phone with exaggerated interest. "Is this a business dinner or family time?" Eleanor asked, pouring herself a generous glass of Cabernet. "Is there a difference anymore?" Daniel responded, his voice carrying the weight of his growing suspicions. "When did we stop being a family? First and a business second?" The uncomfortable silence that followed was his first taste of the betrayal to come, a harbinger of the jungle days that awaited him, where the only sounds would be the distant calls of birds he couldn't name and the quiet whisper of leaves that seemed to know his secrets. The unsigned termination letter lay on the boardroom table like a landmine. Daniel stared at his name printed at the top, the formal language of corporate dismissal rendered in the same font his grandfather had chosen for the company letterhead decades ago. The irony wasn't lost on him. "It's not personal," Marcus said, his Harvard MBA confidence on full display. At 32, his son had his mother's calculating eyes, and none of the passion for architecture that had defined the Blackwood legacy. The board vote was unanimous. "Unanimous," Daniel repeated, looking at each family member sitting across from him. Eleanor, Marcus, Sophia, the holy trinity of betrayal, dressed in designer suits and wearing expressions of practiced sympathy. "Dad, the Reynolds merger offers significant advantages," Sophia added, her legal background evident in her precise terminology. "Your retirement package is extremely generous, 3 times industry standard." Daniel pushed the document away. "When did you start the negotiations?" The silence confirmed his suspicions. "This wasn't a recent development. 14 months ago," Eleanor finally admitted. "After you refused to consider their initial offer." 14 months, Daniel echoed. "While I was restoring the Harrington estate, you were selling my father's company." "Your company," Marcus corrected. "That's the problem. You've always seen it as yours, not ours. You consult us but never truly listen." Daniel looked at the architectural model displayed on the credenza behind them, his design for a community center that had won international recognition. "That building helped house 300 homeless veterans. And lost us money," Sophia countered. "Reynolds wants to take our design aesthetic and apply it to profitable ventures, luxury condominiums, exclusive resorts." "Soulless boxes with premium price tags," Daniel muttered. Eleanor leaned forward. "We've lived in your shadow for decades. I gave up my own firm to support yours. The children grew up watching you take bows while I managed operations, client relations, and our family." Her words struck deeper than the termination notice. "You're punishing me for your choices." "We're freeing ourselves," she replied. "Reynolds appointed Marcus as creative director and Sophia as chief counsel. I'll head client relations." "And what about our commitment to sustainable design? Historical, preservation, community projects?" Marcus's expression hardened. "Those were your passions, not company mandates." Daniel rose slowly, a sudden clarity washing over him. He reached inside his jacket and removed a small velvet pouch, a family heirloom containing his grandmother's wedding ring that he'd planned to have reset for their anniversary. 35 years together, Eleanor. Was any of it real?" She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Parts, but somewhere along the way, I became your employee rather than your partner." The ring remained in the pouch as Daniel placed it on the table. "You'll have my formal response within 48 hours." Outside the glass fortress of Blackwood headquarters, rain fell in sheets. Daniel walked 12 blocks before realizing he was soaked to the skin. His phone buzzed repeatedly, likely his assistant wondering why he'd missed his afternoon appointments. None of it mattered now. At home, he moved through the rooms like a ghost. Family photographs on the walls suddenly seemed like museum exhibits of a fabricated history. In his study, he pulled out an old leather suitcase from the closet, the one he'd used during his college backpacking days. A forgotten compass fell from an interior pocket, his father's initials still visible on its tarnished case. Daniel held it in his palm, watching the needle spin erratically before settling on north. A direction. Any direction away from here. He packed methodically, practical clothing, basic toiletries, the compass, and enough cash to disappear. No credit cards, no phone, nothing to track. On his desk, he left a single sheet of paper with one line. I hereby resign from Blackwood Architectural Solutions, effective immediately. By dawn, Daniel Blackwood had vanished. Driving south in a used car, purchased with cash from a dealer who didn't ask questions. The compass sat on the passenger seat, the needle now spinning wildly, as if confused by its owner's destination, or perhaps sensing the jungle that awaited him. It was simply trying to warn him of what lay ahead. The worn, leather-bound sketchbook had survived 17 days in the jungle, though its pages were now rippled from humidity. Daniel traced his finger over yesterday's hasty drawing, a primitive shelter of palm fronds and branches that had collapsed during the night's downpour. Today's page remained blank, his architectural instinct still searching for inspiration in this unforgiving place. 3 weeks ago, he had been designing million-dollar structures. Now he couldn't craft a roof that would keep him dry. Humbling, he murmured to the empty air, his voice startling a brilliantly colored bird from a nearby branch. His own beard was streaked with gray, his hands scratched and calloused from failed attempts at jungle survival. After abandoning his car at the edge of a small Costa Rican village, Daniel had walked for 2 days before the terrain became wild enough to swallow him. No trails, no markers, just green density closing behind him like a living curtain. The first week had been pure adrenaline and anger, hacking through vines with a machete purchased from a bemused shopkeeper, sleeping fitfully beneath sprawling roots, drinking from streams when thirst overcame caution. He'd lost 15 pounds already, his designer clothes hanging loose and filthy on his frame. The second week brought fever. 3 days of delirium, where Eleanor's voice seemed to call from the canopy, and his grandfather appeared beside him, disappointment evident in his spectral eyes. "You abandoned the company," the apparition accused. "They abandoned me first," Daniel had argued with empty air. Mosquitoes gathering on his sweat-slicked skin. When the fever broke, something else had taken its place, a peculiar clarity that came with extreme isolation. He began drawing again. First the plants and unusual formations around him, then designs for better shelters. The sketchbook became his companion and sanity. Today marked his 17th day of exile. The rain had stopped, leaving behind a heavy mist that transformed the jungle into a dreamscape of ghostly trees and muffled sounds. Daniel turned to a fresh page in the sketchbook and began drawing the twisted root system of the giant tree that had become his latest temporary home. His stomach growled in protest. The last of his packed supplies had disappeared days ago, forcing him to experiment with fruits that resembled those sold at village markets. Some proved edible. Others left him retching behind bushes, learning survival through painful trial and error. "You've made your point," he said aloud, unsure if he was addressing himself, the jungle, or some cosmic scorekeeper. "They betrayed you. You disappeared." Dramatic statement delivered, but where would he go now? The architectural world would have heard about his abrupt departure. Eleanor would have crafted a narrative, mental health crisis perhaps, or burnout. Something that would preserve the company's image while erasing his. Daniel closed the sketchbook and secured it in his waterproof bag. Standing, he realized he had no destination in mind. North, south, east, west, all presented identical walls of vegetation. He retrieved his father's compass from his pocket, watching as the needle spun in useless circles before stopping on what should have been northwest. Something about its behavior had changed since he'd entered deeper jungle. The needle now seemed to respond to something else, something beyond magnetic north. When he moved in the direction it indicated, it would suddenly swing to point elsewhere, as if deliberately leading him on a winding path. "Have you lost your mind along with your family?" he asked himself, yet found his feet following the compass's bizarre guidance anyway. As afternoon light filtered through the canopy in slanted golden beams, Daniel noticed the vegetation changing subtly. Older trees, denser undergrowth. The air carried a different scent, something ancient and undisturbed. The compass needle began spinning faster, then stopped with unexpected finality. Daniel looked up from the instrument. 20 paces ahead, a massive kiba tree stood like a sentinel, its buttress roots creating natural archways. Beyond one such arch, barely visible through curtains of moss and vines, something unnatural interrupted the organic chaos of the jungle. A straight line, a corner, the unmistakable geometry of human design. The compass had led him to a structure hidden within the embrace of the forest, camouflaged by time and nature, yet undeniably present. And as thunder rolled overhead, Daniel Blackwood stepped toward the impossible, sketchbook clutched to his chest like armor against whatever waited beyond the veil of vines. A brass door key hung from a hook beside the entrance, impossibly untarnished despite the jungle's corrosive embrace. Daniel weighed it in his palm, solid, cool, and somehow defiant of time itself. The door it unlocked stood before him, wooden planks weathered yet intact, secured by hand-forged hinges that should have rusted away decades ago. The cabin shouldn't exist. Not here, buried deep within uncharted jungle. Not in this condition, preserved as if the choking vines and persistent humidity had agreed to leave it untouched. Daniel inserted the key with trembling fingers, expecting resistance. The lock mechanism turned with well-oiled precision. "Hello?" His voice sounded foreign after days of near silence. No response came from within. The door swung inward on silent hinges, revealing a single room bathed in amber light. Daniel blinked, adjusting to the interior dimness. A kerosene lantern burned steadily on a simple wooden table, the source of the warm glow visible through the cabin's single window. The flame inside danced without flickering, without diminishing. "Impossible," he whispered, checking the lantern's fuel chamber. Full yet sealed with dust. No one had refilled it recently, or perhaps ever. The cabin's contents presented a museum-like tableau. A narrow bed with a faded quilt. A stone fireplace with cold ashes in the grate. Shelves lined with books whose spines bore no titles. A desk beneath the window, papers arranged in meticulous order. Daniel moved cautiously inside, hyper-aware of the sound of his boots on the wooden floor. No footprints disturbed the fine layer of dust, save his own forming with each step. Yet nothing felt abandoned or neglected, merely waiting. On the table, beside the lantern, lay an open book, a journal with handwritten entries. Daniel leaned closer, careful not to touch the pages. The handwriting was precise, architectural in its discipline, similar to his own careful drafting notation. The visible entry bore a date, June 17th, 1973. "Today marks my 3rd month in the cabin," it read. "The jungle continues its attempts to communicate, though I cannot yet comprehend its language. The lantern has not required refilling, nor has the food supply diminished despite my consumption. Time operates differently here, both accelerated and suspended. I believe I have found what the ancients called a thin place, where the membrane between worlds grows permeable." Daniel pulled back, his breath catching. The date was 50 years ago, yet the ink appeared freshly dried. Above the fireplace hung a single framed photograph. Daniel approached it, using his handkerchief to wipe away dust from the glass. A man stood before this very cabin, perhaps in his mid-50s, Daniel's own age. The man's face caused Daniel to stumble backward, colliding with the table. It was his own face. Not similar, identical. Same eyes, same jawline, same slight scar above the right eyebrow from a childhood fall. The photograph was labeled in the same handwriting as the journal. "Thomas Blackwood, 1973. Thomas Blackwood," Daniel repeated. No relative by that name existed in the family records. Yet the resemblance was uncanny, beyond coincidence, beyond explanation. A sudden rumble of thunder shook the cabin. Outside, rain began to fall in torrential sheets. Daniel moved to the doorway, watching as the jungle path he'd followed disappeared under the deluge. Returning to civilization tonight was no longer an option. His gaze returned to the journal on the table. Carefully he turned to the first page. The initial entry stopped his heart. April 4th, 1973. Today, my family betrayed me. My wife Elaine, son Michael, and daughter Sarah have conspired to remove me from Blackwood Design Associates, the company my grandfather built. I have fled into the jungle with nothing but my compass and the clothes on my back. There is nothing left for me in the world of men. Daniel sank into the chair beside the table, the parallel too precise to be coincidence. His eyes fell on the next line, which seemed to swim on the page as he read it. To whoever finds this journal after me, likely another Blackwood man betrayed by his blood, you have not found this cabin by accident. The compass has led you here, as it led me. You are exactly where you are meant to be, though you do not yet understand why. Outside, the storm intensified. Inside, Daniel Blackwood stared at the impossible words written by a ghost with his face. As the lantern continued to burn with its unwavering, eternal flame, the antique pocket watch lay open on the cabin table, its hands frozen at 3:17. Daniel had found it wedged between the journal's pages, marking an entry from July 1973. According to Thomas's writings, the watch had belonged to their shared grandfather, Robert Blackwood, though Daniel had never seen it among the family heirlooms. Dawn filtered through the cabin's single window as Daniel pored over the journal. He had read through the night, sleep impossible, as each entry unveiled parallels too precise to dismiss as coincidence. Thomas Blackwood hadn't just resembled Daniel. He had lived Daniel's life 5 decades earlier. Same architectural passion, same commitment to sustainable design before such concepts were mainstream. Same family structure, same betrayal. We are caught in a loop, Thomas had written. A punishment designed by forces beyond our understanding. The sins of our grandfather visited upon each generation until amends are made. Daniel ran his finger over the watch's engraved surface, feeling the Blackwood family crest, a tree with roots as prominent as its branches, the symbol he'd incorporated into countless building designs, believing it represented strength and heritage. According to Thomas, it symbolized something darker. Robert Blackwood did not create our family fortune through honest means, one entry read. He stole sacred land from the indigenous guardians of this jungle, built our first project upon their temple. The cabin exists at the nexus of that desecration, a place where time folds upon itself, trapping those who bear the blood of the desecrator. Daniel closed the watch with a snap. Family mythology had always celebrated his grandfather as a visionary who discovered an uninhabited tract of land with fortuitous natural resources. The company's origin story, repeated at every anniversary celebration, a fiction if Thomas's account was true. The journal detailed Thomas's discoveries during his months in the cabin, how the surrounding jungle existed in multiple time frames simultaneously, how the cabin itself served as both prison and sanctuary for Blackwood men who suffered familial betrayal. I am not the first, Thomas had written. In the space beneath the floorboards, I found journals from others. James Blackwood, 1921, William Blackwood, 1887, each betrayed, each guided here, each trapped until they completed what our grandfather left unfinished. Daniel moved to the spot Thomas had described. A loose floorboard yielded to his touch, revealing a small compartment beneath. Inside lay 2 leather journals, their pages yellow with age. The handwriting in each was distinctly different, yet eerily similar to Daniel's own architectural notation. Precise, measured, disciplined. The earliest journal, Williams, described dreams of the guardian who appeared as a figure wearing a mask of jade and feathers. James wrote of the same entity, calling it the voice of the jungle. Thomas's entries mentioned increasing visitations from this presence as his time in the cabin progressed. The Guardian speaks through the trees. Thomas had written in his final entry, "It has shown me the ceremony that might break our family's curse. But the price is steep, a blackwood sacrifice freely given. I begin preparations tomorrow." The entry ended there. The remaining pages lay blank. Daniel returned to the table, the watch heavy in his palm. Outside, the jungle had fallen strangely silent, as if listening. The lantern's flame remained steady, unaffected by the breeze that now stirred through the open window. He opened the watch again, studying its motionless hands. According to James's journal, the watch had stopped the moment their grandfather desecrated the sacred ground, 3:17 on a long-ago afternoon. It would not restart, James claimed, until balance was restored. A rustling sound drew Daniel's attention to the doorway. Nothing visible caused the noise, yet the sensation of being observed intensified. The compass, resting beside the lantern, began to spin its needle rapidly. "I know you're there," Daniel said to the empty air, feeling both foolish and certain. "Guardian, voice, whatever you call yourself." The rustling grew louder. The lantern flame stretched impossibly upward, casting elongated shadows across the cabin walls. "My grandfather wronged your people," Daniel continued. "Thomas tried to make amends. Now it's my turn, isn't it? That's why I'm here." The flame snapped back to normal. The compass needle stopped, pointing directly at Daniel, on the open page of Thomas's journal, where only blankness had existed moments before. A single line of fresh text appeared in handwriting not his own. "The cycle continues until a blackwood chooses differently. You are not trapped, Daniel. You are called." The jade mask rested on a shelf Daniel hadn't noticed before, as if the cabin had rearranged itself overnight. Intricately carved with patterns resembling both leaves and scales, the mask emanated a faint green luminescence in the cabin's shadowy corners. Its empty eye sockets seemed to track his movements as he prepared a breakfast from the cabin's mysteriously stocked pantry. 3 days had passed since his arrival. 3 days of reading journals, exploring the cabin's impossible architecture, and waiting for something. The Guardian had not manifested again beyond that single line of text, though Daniel sensed its constant presence, a watchfulness that permeated the very walls. "I'm not hiding," Daniel announced to the empty room, addressing the mask directly. "If you have something to say to me, say it." Only silence answered him. But the mask's glow intensified briefly. Daniel had established a routine, partly to maintain sanity in this place where time behaved strangely. Mornings spent studying the journals, afternoons exploring the surrounding jungle, never venturing far enough to lose sight of the cabin. Evenings documenting his own observations, adding to the chronicle that stretched back generations. His exploration had revealed peculiarities in the landscape. A stream that flowed uphill, trees bearing fruit that, according to his botanical knowledge, shouldn't coexist in the same ecosystem. Birds with plumage combinations he'd never seen in any wildlife guide. Most disturbing were the moments when the jungle shifted, clearings that disappeared when he turned around, paths that rearranged themselves behind him. Once he'd observed a section of forest aging rapidly, flowers blooming, withering and decaying in minutes, only to repeat the cycle. The cabin alone remained consistent, a fixed point in fluid reality. Daniel approached the mask cautiously, his coffee mug warm in his hands. "Were you Thomas's guardian too? Or do you change with each blackwood who finds this place?" The mask remained inert. He returned to the table where he'd arranged the journals chronologically. William's from 1887, James's from 1921, Thomas's from 1973, and now his own begun in 2023. 4 men spanning nearly 140 years, united by blood, betrayal, and this inexplicable cabin. William's final entry described preparing for a ritual at a place called the Convergence, a natural amphitheater where the Guardian had promised to meet him. He never wrote of what happened there, James's journal ended similarly, though he'd drawn elaborate diagrams of stone formations arranged in concentric circles, with notes about astronomical alignments and tidal patterns that made no sense this far inland. Thomas had been more explicit. The guardian requires blood freely given, but not life. Sacrifice without death, atonement without destruction. The opposing forces must be balanced. Daniel sipped his coffee, contemplating. His architectural training had included extensive study of indigenous building practices and sacred spaces. The descriptions in the journals suggested a site designed to channel natural energies, a concept he'd encountered in research but dismissed as superstition. Now, surrounded by impossibility, dismissal seemed foolish. A flutter of movement caught his eye. Outside the window, a butterfly with wings like stained glass hovered, its patterns shifting from Mayan glyphs to modern architectural blueprints and back again. When it alighted on the windowsill, Daniel noticed it had landed on a folded paper that hadn't been there moments before. He approached slowly, expecting the butterfly to flee. Instead, it remained as he carefully unfolded the weathered document. It was a map, hand-drawn in ink, that shimmered between sepia and emerald. The cabin appeared at its center, with paths radiating outward like spokes. One path, marked with symbols matching those on the jade mask, led to a circular clearing labeled in an unfamiliar script. As Daniel studied it, the script shifted before his eyes. Rearranging into English, the convergence. The butterfly took flight, circling Daniel's head once before darting out the open door. Without conscious decision, he found himself following, the map clutched in his hand. The jade mask's glow pulsed once, then dimmed as he crossed the threshold. Outside, the morning jungle hummed with life. The butterfly waited, iridescent wings pulsing with invitation, hovering above the exact path marked on the map. "I'm being summoned," Daniel realized aloud. The wind whispered in response, forming words just at the edge of comprehension. The butterfly began moving deeper into the jungle, and Daniel Blackwood, architect, betrayed son, latest link in a chain spanning generations, followed it toward a destiny his forebears had failed to fulfill. The obsidian ceremonial blade caught the dappled sunlight as Daniel examined it, the edge still sharp despite centuries of existence. He had found it embedded in the center stone of the convergence, a perfect circle of megalithic blocks arranged in a natural clearing. The butterfly guide had led him here before dissolving into motes of light that scattered among the trees. What am I supposed to do with this? Daniel turned the blade carefully, noting the intricate glyphs etched into its handle. They resembled the symbols from the map, yet subtly different, more angular, more urgent. The convergence hummed with unseen energy. 7 stone pillars surrounded a central platform where the blade had been wedged, their surfaces covered with carvings similar to those in the cabin. The place felt ancient yet alive, like the architectural equivalent of an old-growth forest. Daniel stepped onto the central platform, blade in hand. The moment his feet touched the stone, the air pressure changed. Sounds became muffled, light shifted toward blue wavelengths, and the sensation of being observed intensified hundredfold. "I know you're here," he called out. "I've followed your signs. I've read the journals. What do you want from me?" The wind picked up, swirling leaves around the circle. They collected and compressed, forming a humanoid shape opposite Daniel. Gradually, the leaf figure solidified into something more substantial, a tall entity wearing the same jade mask from the cabin, its body composed of twisted vines and bark resembling sinew and muscle. Daniel Blackwood. The voice emerged not from the figure, but from the stones themselves, vibrating up through Daniel's feet. Last of a tainted line. "Son of desecrators!" Daniel gripped the obsidian blade tighter. "I didn't desecrate anything. That was my grandfather, generations ago. The sin travels through blood." The guardian circled him slowly. "Your family built fortune on stolen sanctity. 4 generations have come seeking absolution. 4 have failed. Failed how?" The journals don't say what happened to them. The mask tilted, its empty eye sockets somehow expressing contempt. They began the ceremony but could not complete it. The price seemed too high. What price? The same price that creates all true balance, sacrifice. Daniel looked down at the blade in his hand, understanding dawning. Blood freely given. Your ancestors stole our sacred ground, built monuments to his own glory upon our temple, diverted the energy lines that sustained our people for millennia. The Guardian's plant body rustled with ancient anger. The journals tell only fragments. Your grandfather didn't merely build on our land. He destroyed a nexus of power to fuel his ambition. How is that possible? Daniel asked. He was an architect, not a sorcerer. The division you perceive does not exist. Builders of spaces are shapers of energy. Your grandfather understood enough of our science to corrupt it. The compass that guided you here? A fragment of our wayfinding technology, repurposed to serve your family's needs. Daniel remembered the compass's erratic behavior, its seeming sentience. So the journals, the cabin, the betrayals, all part of some cosmic justice? Not justice, balance. The energy stolen must be returned. The corruption must be cleansed. Each generation of Blackwoods is given the chance to restore what was taken, and if I succeed where the others failed. The Guardian's form shimmered, momentarily revealing glimpses of other faces behind the mask, faces Daniel recognized from the photographs and descriptions. William, James, Thomas, his predecessors. Then the cycle ends. The curse lifts. Your family finds peace across time, and if I fail, the Guardian gestured toward the obsidian blade. Then you join us. Another face behind the mask. Another voice calling to the next Blackwood, who will inevitably be betrayed and find his way here. Daniel studied the blade, the weight of generations heavy in his palm. What must I do? Return to the cabin. When the moon rises full tonight, bring the blade to the stream that flows uphill. There, you will receive further guidance. The Guardian began to disintegrate, leaves and vines separating and returning to natural disorder. As it faded, its final words lingered in the air. Remember, Daniel Blackwood, the sacrifice must be voluntary. The blood must be given, not taken. Therein lies the difference between desecration and consecration. Alone again in the convergence, Daniel clutched the obsidian blade and contemplated what sacrifice might be required of him. The journals had offered clues, but no definitive answers. Each predecessor had reached this point, but faltered at the critical moment. As he turned to leave, he noticed fresh carvings appearing on the central stone, forming a familiar pattern before his eyes. The Blackwood family tree, its roots and branches intertwining in perfect symmetry. Except now, certain branches were being severed by an invisible chisel, leaving only one line intact, his line. The faded missing person poster stared back at Eleanor from across her kitchen counter. Daniel's face caught in a formal corporate photograph, the kind he had always disliked. Missing, Daniel Blackwood, 56, read the bold text above details about his appearance, last known whereabouts, and a number to call with information. 6 weeks since his disappearance. 6 weeks of pretending to the board that this was a planned sabbatical. 6 weeks of mounting dread as private investigators found nothing but dead ends. Any updates? Marcus asked, entering the kitchen with his usual confidence, now tempered by shadows under his eyes. He'd lost weight, his expensive suit hanging slightly loose. Eleanor slid a manila folder toward him. The investigator tracked him to Costa Rica, rental car abandoned in a village called San Miguel. The locals remember him buying camping supplies, a machete. A machete. Sophia joined them, her legal briefcase clutched like a shield. Dad can barely change a light bulb. He was an Eagle Scout, Eleanor corrected quietly. Before he became an architect. He knows more about survival than you'd think. The three of them stood in uncomfortable silence, the spacious kitchen suddenly claustrophobic. The Reynolds Group acquisition had stalled. After Daniel's disappearance, legal complications about succession and outstanding shares that Sophia couldn't untangle without his signature. Marcus picked up the poster. We need to make these look less accusatory. "They're standard missing person posters," Eleanor said. "They make us look like we're searching for a criminal, not a family member." He gestured at Daniel's stern expression. "Couldn't we use a more casual photo? Something that doesn't scream corporate takeover victim?" Eleanor slammed her coffee mug down. "Is that what you're worried about?" "How this looks." "We all know how it looks," Sophia interjected, her lawyer's instinct for damage control activating. "Dad disappears right after we present the Reynolds deal. The timing is problematic from a public relations perspective." Problematic. Eleanor tasted the word like something bitter. "Our family is falling apart. The company is in limbo. Daniel could be hurt or worse. And you're concerned about PR?" Marcus straightened. "The company employs over 200 people. Their livelihoods depend on us maintaining stability. Besides," Sophia added, "Dad clearly left voluntarily. The investigator confirmed he purchased supplies, exchanged currency. This wasn't a kidnapping." Eleanor studied her children, wondering when they had become such perfect strangers. When had Blackwood Architectural Solutions transformed from Daniel's passion project into a corporate entity that devoured its own creator? "I found something," she said finally, pulling another folder from her bag. While looking for clues in Daniel's study, she spread out yellowed newspaper clippings and photographs. One headline from 1973 jumped out: "Blackwood design partner vanishes after disputed takeover." Sophia leaned closer. "Thomas Blackwood? I've never heard that name. He was your grandfather's younger brother. Co-founder of the original firm." Eleanor pointed to a photograph showing a man with an uncanny resemblance to Daniel. "According to these articles, there was some kind of dispute. Thomas disappeared afterward. The family never spoke of him again." Marcus lifted one of the clippings. "This says he was last seen in Costa Rica, the same region where Dad's trail goes cold," Eleanor confirmed. "And there's more. I found records of another disappearance in 1921, James Blackwood, after his partners forced him out of the lumber business that preceded our architectural firm." Sophia's legal mind engaged. "You're suggesting what, some kind of family curse?" "I'm suggesting a pattern we should have noticed." Eleanor gathered the clippings. "Daniel spent months researching his family history last year. He was disturbed by something he found. Now he's following the same path as these other men." Marcus scoffed. "This is absurd. Dad left because he couldn't accept change. Simple as that, is it?" Eleanor retrieved one final document, a page from Daniel's research notes. His grandfather's original project in Costa Rica was built on land with disputed ownership claims. Indigenous groups filed complaints that were mysteriously dropped. The site was supposedly an ancient ceremonial ground. Every patch of jungle has some historical claim." Sophia dismissed. "That's why we have legal departments." Eleanor folded the missing person poster, tucking it into her purse alongside the historical documents. "I'm going to Costa Rica, to San Miguel. I need to understand what happened." "Mum, be reasonable," Marcus protested. "The investigators have failed," she interrupted. "Something pulled Daniel there, something connected to his family history. I'm going to find out what." As her children launched into simultaneous objections, Eleanor felt a strange calm settle over her. For the first time since the betrayal, she had purpose. Daniel hadn't just fled in anger. He was answering a call neither of them had understood. And now, that same call was reaching for her. The ancient ceramic bowl gleamed with an inner light as Daniel filled it with water from the uphill flowing stream. Perfectly preserved despite its apparent age, the bowl featured intricate patterns that shifted subtly when he wasn't looking directly at them. Spirals, becoming waves, becoming text, in a language he couldn't read but somehow understood. Moonlight bathed the convergence in silver-blue radiance. Daniel had returned as instructed, obsidian blades secured in his belt, the ceremonial bowl now cradled in his hands. Full moon directly overhead, casting no shadows, a time between times as Thomas had written in his journal. "I have come as instructed," Daniel announced to the night air. "I bring the blade and the vessel." The stream gurgled in response, its waters flowing impossibly upward over rocks and against gravity. Daniel followed its course to the central stone platform, where he'd first encountered the Guardian. There, he placed the bowl at the exact center, watching as the water inside remained perfectly level, despite the uneven surface. "The sacrifice must be voluntary," he recited from memory. "The blood must be given, not taken." Minutes passed in silence broken only by jungle sounds, distant howler monkeys, the rustle of nocturnal creatures, wind through leaves that sounded almost like whispered conversations. Daniel waited, patient as only a man who had lost everything could be. A flicker of movement caught his attention. Not the Guardian this time, but a ghostly figure seated on one of the stone pillars, a man in outdated clothing, features hauntingly familiar. Thomas. Daniel approached cautiously. The apparition nodded. "You see me? That's promising. Are you real?" "Define real." Thomas's form wavered like heat shimmer. "I exist, though not as you do. Not anymore." Another figure materialized on a different pillar, older, dressed in early 20th century attire. "James Blackwood," he introduced himself with a formal nod. "Class of 1899, Yale School of Architecture." A third figure appeared, Victorian clothing marking him as the earliest arrival. "William," he said simply, "you're the fourth to attempt the restoration. Perhaps the last, if you succeed." Daniel looked between his ancestors, understanding dawning. "You never left." "You're trapped here." "Not trapped," Thomas corrected. "Transformed. We each attempted the ceremony. We each hesitated at the crucial moment." James gestured toward the obsidian blade. "The Guardian requires sacrifice, but the nature of that sacrifice. It was more than we could give. What does it want?" Daniel asked. "My blood, my life?" William's ghost laughed without humor. "If only it were that simple. Blood and life are crude currencies. The Guardian deals in more complex exchanges." Daniel felt frustration rising. "Stop speaking in riddles. Tell me what I need to do." The three apparitions exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. Finally, Thomas spoke. "The land our grandfather stole wasn't just property. It was a nexus, a place where realities intersect. The indigenous Guardians maintained the balance between worlds for generations. When Robert Blackwood desecrated their temple and built his first project, he didn't just displace people. He fractured time itself. The compass, Daniel realized. The cabin. The strange behavior of the jungle. They're all symptoms of this fracture?" James nodded. "The betrayal you experienced, that we all experienced, is part of the pattern. The fracture corrupts bloodlines, causing history to repeat. Children betray fathers. Siblings turn against siblings. The pattern will continue until balance is restored. How do I restore it?" William pointed to the bowl. "You must offer something more valuable than blood, more permanent than life. Your legacy," Thomas clarified. "The company built on desecration, the fortune amassed from stolen spiritual energy. The Blackwood name itself." Daniel stared at the bowl, understanding slowly crystallizing. "You want me to renounce my family's company? Our wealth?" "Not renounce," James corrected. "Return, transform. The company must become a vehicle for restoration rather than exploitation. And if I do this, the cycle ends. No more betrayals." Thomas's form flickered. "The Guardian approaches. It will explain the rest." The three ghosts faded as the familiar leaf and vine figure materialized beside the central stone. The Guardian regarded Daniel with its empty mask eyes. "You have brought the blade and the vessel," it observed. "Now you must understand the true sacrifice required." Daniel straightened his shoulders. "My ancestors have explained. You want me to transform the company, to give up our wealth and power." "Not give up," the Guardian corrected. "Redirect. The energy lines your grandfather corrupted must be restored. The company he built must become the instrument of that restoration." It gestured toward the bowl, where the water now swirled without any physical disturbance. "The ceremony requires 3 elements, blood freely given, a vow sincerely spoken, and a vessel to carry your intent back across the fracture." Daniel removed the obsidian blade from his belt, its edge gleaming in the moonlight. "I am ready," he said, though uncertainty flickered beneath his determination. "Tell me what to do." The old land deed trembled in Eleanor's hands as she sat in the dimly lit office of Hector Mendoza, the only historian in San Miguel who had agreed to meet with her. Yellow with age and frayed at the edges, the document bore the unmistakable signature of Robert Blackwood, alongside official government stamps dated 1884. "This is what you sought?" Mendoza asked, his weathered face grave in the lamplight. Outside, rain battered the windows of his cluttered office, filled with artifacts and books documenting the region's troubled colonial past. "Yes," Eleanor whispered, scanning the elegant script. The deed transferred ownership of 5,000 acres from the unincorporated tribal lands to Robert Blackwood Enterprises for a sum that, even adjusted for inflation, was insultingly meager. This is where it all began. She had spent a week in Costa Rica, following increasingly bizarre clues about her husband's disappearance. The private investigator had given up after tracing Daniel to the edge of the protected forest reserve, declaring the trail cold. But Eleanor had continued, driven by the historical pattern she'd uncovered and her growing certainty that Daniel hadn't simply fled in anger. "There is more to this document than mere land transfer," Mendoza said cautiously. He pointed to symbols in the deed's margins, small glyphs that resembled no official seal she recognized. "These markings reference El Templo de Encrucijada, what my ancestors called the Crossroads Temple, a sacred site believed to exist where worlds intersect." Eleanor studied the symbols. "And this temple was on the land my husband's grandfather purchased." "Not purchased," Mendoza corrected firmly. "Seized. The official history claims the local tribes abandoned the land voluntarily, but my grandmother told different stories." He hesitated before continuing. "Stories of a curse placed upon the Blackwood bloodline. A curse of betrayal and disappearance." Eleanor felt a chill, despite the humid night. "Thomas Blackwood vanished in 1973, James Blackwood in 1921, both after family conflicts. Now my husband, all drawn to the same place?" Mendoza nodded. "The jungle calls them back to finish what was started." "Finish what, exactly?" Mendoza retrieved an old journal from his crowded bookshelf. "My grandmother was keeper of oral histories for her people. When I began my studies, she insisted I record them." He opened to a marked page. "She spoke of guardians who maintained harmony at the Crossroads Temple, ensuring balance between human world and spirit world. When Robert Blackwood destroyed the temple to build his first project, he disrupted this balance. What happened to these guardians?" "The last guardian disappeared into the jungle, vowing that the Blackwood men would face judgment across generations until one arrived who would restore what was taken." Mendoza traced the strange glyphs on the deed. "According to the stories, the temple exists in multiple times simultaneously. Those who find it step outside normal time." Eleanor thought of Daniel's research, his growing obsession with family history in the months before the Reynolds takeover. "My husband found something in his grandfather's records, something that disturbed him deeply. Perhaps he discovered the truth your family has hidden for generations." Mendoza closed his grandmother's journal. "That your fortune was built upon sacred ground and that a price remains unpaid." Eleanor gathered the deed carefully. "Can you take me there, to where the temple stood?" Mendoza shook his head firmly. "No one enters that section of jungle and returns unchanged if they return at all. The locals avoid it. Even the wildlife behaves strangely near the boundaries." "My husband is there," Eleanor insisted. "I need to find him. If Daniel Blackwood has found the temple, he exists between worlds now. You cannot simply walk in and bring him out." Mendoza studied her face. Unless what? Unless you are part of his journey. The stories say the Guardian's judgment extends to all who benefit from the desecration." Eleanor thought of the Reynolds deal, the years of pushing Daniel to expand and commercialize, her own ambition that had slowly poisoned their marriage. "I betrayed him," she admitted quietly. "We all did." Mendoza nodded solemnly. "Then perhaps the jungle calls you too." He retrieved a faded map from a drawer, unfolding it carefully on his desk. "I cannot accompany you, but I can show you where to begin." The rest of the path, he paused, searching for words. The rest will reveal itself if you are meant to find it. Eleanor traced the route with her finger, committing it to memory. What am I walking into? A reckoning, Mendoza replied simply. For your family and perhaps for you. Outside, the storm intensified. Lightning illuminated the small office in stark flashes, casting the land deed's strange symbols in momentary relief. For an instant, Eleanor thought they shifted beneath her gaze, rearranging into a pattern that almost resembled her husband's face. Tomorrow, she would enter the jungle, armed only with a map, a compass borrowed from Mendoza, and the growing weight of generational guilt. Somewhere beyond the tangled green barrier, Daniel was confronting a legacy neither of them had fully understood. Eleanor folded the deed and placed it in her bag, wondering if forgiveness waited somewhere on the other side of judgment. The stone altar stood at the exact center of the convergence, rising from the earth overnight like a living thing. Rectangular and austere, its surface bore intricate carvings that matched the patterns on Daniel's obsidian blade. At its center rested a shallow depression, precisely sized to hold the ceramic bowl. Daniel circled the altar cautiously. The guardian had departed after explaining the ritual, leaving him alone with his thoughts and the ghostly presences of his ancestors, who watched silently from the stone pillars surrounding the clearing. "You're hesitating," Thomas observed, his spectral form flickering in the moonlight. "As we all did." "I'm considering," Daniel corrected. "The Guardian wants me to fundamentally transform the company my family built, to redirect its resources toward restoring this land and the energy lines." William's ghost nodded. "The price of breaking the cycle." "It's not the price that concerns me," Daniel said. "It's whether I have the right. The company isn't mine alone anymore. My family took that from me." James stepped forward, his form more substantial than the others. "That's where we all faltered. We each believed we'd lost control, that the betrayal had stripped us of authority, hadn't it?" Daniel challenged. Thomas shook his head. "The betrayal is part of the test. The Guardian doesn't want someone who controls the company. It wants someone willing to sacrifice despite having lost control." Daniel considered this, running his fingers over the altar's surface. "And the blood? What purpose does that serve?" "Intent made manifest," William explained. "Words are just vibrations in air. Blood is essence, the physical embodiment of commitment." A distant sound drew Daniel's attention, something between a whisper and a song, carried on the night breeze. The jungle around them shifted subtly, trees bending inward as if listening. "The ceremony window is opening," James warned. "The convergence of time approaches. Now or never, Daniel." Daniel placed the ceramic bowl in the altar's depression, where it fit perfectly. He removed the obsidian blade from his belt. "I need to know one thing," he said to his ancestors. "If I succeed, what happens to all of you?" The three ghosts exchanged glances before Thomas answered. "We find peace. Our part in maintaining the fracture ends, and if I fail, you join us." Another phantom guarding the breach, waiting for the next Blackwood to attempt restoration. Daniel nodded slowly, decision crystallizing. "My wife and children betrayed me, took my company, destroyed my legacy. Why should I sacrifice everything to fix a problem I didn't create?" "Because you're the only one who can," came a new voice from the jungle's edge. Daniel turned sharply. A figure emerged from the darkness. Eleanor, her clothes torn and muddied, her face scratched from branches, but her eyes clear and focused. She stopped at the edge of the stone circle, visibly startled by the ghostly figures, but holding her ground. "How did you find this place?" Daniel demanded, shock giving way to anger. "Why are you here?" "I followed you," she said simply. "First to Costa Rica, then into the jungle. A historian named Mendoza showed me where to begin." She gestured to a compass clutched in her hand, identical to Daniel's. "This led me the rest of the way." The ghosts studied her with evident surprise. William whispered, "No one from the betrayer's side has ever found the convergence before." Eleanor looked between Daniel and the spectral figures. "I don't understand what's happening here, but I know we made a terrible mistake. The company, the Reynolds deal, we were wrong." "It's too late," Daniel said, though his grip on the obsidian blade loosened slightly. The damage is done. Then let me help repair it. She took a step forward, stopped by an invisible barrier at the circle's edge. Daniel, I found the original land deed. I know what your grandfather did. I know about the temple, the guardians, the curse. The jungle song grew louder. The moonlight intensified, casting double shadows behind every object. The window narrows, Thomas warned urgently. Daniel, you must decide. Daniel looked down at the ceremonial items before him, then back at his wife, straining against the invisible barrier. The guardian said the sacrifice must be voluntary, he said slowly, that the blood must be given, not taken. He turned to his ancestors. It never specified whose blood would seal the vow. James's eyes widened. Are you suggesting a shared sacrifice? Daniel confirmed. Eleanor betrayed me, yes, but she's here now, seeking to make amends. Perhaps that's part of the restoration, too. He extended his hand toward the barrier separating them. The question is whether she's willing to pay the price alongside me. Eleanor met his gaze across the ancient stones, understanding passing between them. Whatever it costs, she said firmly. I'm ready. As the words left her lips, the invisible barrier shimmered and dissolved, allowing her passage into the ceremonial circle for the first time in 140 years. The ancient quipu hung suspended in the air between Daniel and Eleanor, its knotted cord swaying gently despite the absence of wind. The guardian had materialized it with a gesture, hundreds of colored strings tied in complex patterns that somehow recorded both history and intention. The binding cord, the guardian explained, its mask gleaming in the intensified moonlight. For a shared sacrifice, both parties must be witnessed and bound by their spoken vows. Eleanor stared at the floating object, her scientific mind struggling with the impossibility before her. Since crossing the barrier into the stone circle, she had been introduced to the ghosts of Daniel's ancestors and the plant-formed guardian. Each impossible revelation had landed like a physical blow, yet she remained standing, her determination undiminished. I don't understand what's happening, she admitted. But I understand why. Daniel studied her face, searching for deception and finding none. How did you really find me? After you disappeared, I discovered the pattern. Thomas, James, William, all Blackwood men who vanished after family betrayals. She gestured toward the spectral figures. I found articles about Thomas in particular. The parallels were unmistakable. The guardian moved closer, vines shifting like muscles beneath its bark-like exterior. She carries Blackwood energy, it observed. Not by blood, but by bond. Interesting. The quipu's knots rearranged themselves subtly, new patterns forming as if recording this development. What does that mean? Daniel asked. It means she can participate, Thomas's ghost explained. Marriage created an energy connection. Her presence here proves it remains intact despite the betrayal. Eleanor stepped forward. I'll do whatever's needed to fix this. The company, the land, whatever you require. Bold words, William commented skeptically. But the sacrifice requires more than promises. The guardian placed the ceremonial bowl on the altar between them. The ritual requires 3 elements: blood freely given, a vow sincerely spoken, and a vessel to carry your intent across the fracture. It extended the obsidian blade toward them. Whose blood shall seal the vow? Whose life force shall fuel the restoration? Daniel reached for the blade, but Eleanor moved faster, taking it before he could. Mine, she said firmly. I was part of the betrayal. I should be part of the atonement. Eleanor, Daniel began. No, she interrupted. For 30 years, I've lived in the shadow of Blackwood Architectural Solutions. I resented you for putting the company first, never realizing I was doing the same. The difference was, you were preserving your grandfather's vision. I was only thinking of myself, the Guardian's mask tilted. The company must be transformed, its resources redirected to healing the energy lines damaged by Robert Blackwood's desecration. This requires legal authority, which I still have, Eleanor said. As CFO, I maintained certain powers regardless of the Reynolds deal. Powers Daniel granted me years ago that the board never revoked. Daniel looked at her with new understanding. The contingency protocols, she nodded. After Marcus and Sophia forced you out, I activated the Heritage Preservation Clause in the company bylaws, the one you created to protect historical projects from being commercialized. It gives me temporary control of 30% of company resources. Not enough for full restoration, the Guardian noted, but enough to begin, Daniel countered. Enough to show intent. The Quipu's knots shifted again, recording their exchange. The moonlight intensified further, casting everything in silver-blue illumination. The jungle song grew louder, more insistent. The convergence peaks, James warned. You must act now. Eleanor positioned herself before the altar, blade in hand. Tell me what to say. The Guardian moved to stand opposite her, mask reflecting moonlight. Speak your intent for restoration. Make your vow to redirect the company's resources toward healing what was broken. Seal it with blood freely given. Eleanor took a deep breath, looking to Daniel. He stepped beside her, placing his hand over hers on the blade's handle. Together, he said quietly. The Guardian nodded its approval as they positioned the blade over their palms. We, Eleanor and Daniel Blackwood, they began in unison, the words somehow known to both. Vow to transform Blackwood Architectural Solutions into an instrument of restoration. We dedicate its resources to healing the energy lines disrupted by Robert Blackwood, to preserving indigenous knowledge, and to protecting the sacred sites he desecrated. The Quipu writhed with increasing energy as they spoke, its knots glowing with internal light. We renounce the profit gained through spiritual theft, Daniel continued. We commit to returning stewardship to the rightful guardians, Eleanor added. Together they concluded, let our blood seal this covenant across time and space. They drew the blade across their palms simultaneously, allowing their mingled blood to drip into the ceremonial bowl. As the first drops touched the vessel, the Quipu erupted with blinding light, its cords extending to wrap around their joined hands like living things. The Guardian's voice resonated through stone and soil. The binding is accepted. The restoration begins. Around them, the jungle itself seemed to exhale. The corporate seal of Blackwood Architectural Solutions shimmered into existence above the altar, its familiar tree logo transforming before their eyes. The roots and branches that had always been symmetrical now shifted, roots growing deeper, branches reaching higher, the balance between them becoming more harmonious and fluid. Daniel and Eleanor watched in astonishment as this manifestation of their company's identity evolved in mid-air, responding to their blood sacrifice and spoken vow. The Quipu's glowing cords remained wrapped around their joined hands, pulsing with energy that flowed between them and into the ceremonial bowl. The symbol changes as the essence changes, the Guardian explained. Its plant body more luminous now, shimmering with internal light. Your company's energy signature is being rewritten. Around them, the ghostly ancestors had grown more substantial, as if drawing strength from the ritual. Thomas stepped forward, his form now almost solid. Something's different, he observed. The previous attempts never progressed this far. The Guardian nodded its masked head. The shared sacrifice creates stronger resonance. Two bloodlines converging instead of one. Marriage bond reinforcing blood bond, Eleanor gasped as the seal suddenly expanded, revealing a three-dimensional model of Blackwood headquarters in Chicago. Within this miniature version, they could see energy flowing through the building's structure like blood through veins. But the flow was unnatural, redirected through architectural elements that formed unmistakable symbols. Your grandfather didn't just build on sacred land, the Guardian explained to Daniel. He incorporated our sacred geometry into his designs to channel energy toward wealth accumulation and personal power. The model zoomed out further, showing connections between Blackwood buildings worldwide, a network of energy siphons disguised as architectural innovation. Every major Blackwood project sits on an energy nexus. William's ghost said gravely, I discovered this too late. As did I, James added. The company isn't just built on stolen land, it's powered by stolen spiritual energy. Eleanor stared at the model in horror. We've continued the pattern without knowing. The Reynolds Group acquisition would have expanded this network exponentially. The corporate seal continued its transformation, the tree now intertwining with geometric elements resembling the temple symbols from the original land deed. As it changed, the model buildings shifted as well, their energy flows reversing direction, now feeding back into the earth rather than extracting from it. The restoration has begun, the Guardian announced. But it remains fragile until anchored in your world. Daniel looked to Eleanor. The Heritage Preservation Clause gives us temporary control. We need something permanent, she nodded in understanding. When we return, I'll convert my shares and your remaining shares into a new entity, a trust dedicated to restoration projects. With my legal authority as CFO and your architectural vision, we can redesign the buildings, Daniel continued, the old spark returning to his eyes. Modify the existing structures to reverse the energy flow, just as we're seeing here. The Guardian approached the floating seal, placing its vine hand upon the transformed symbol. This represents your intent. Now you must manifest it beyond this place. The quipu tightened around their hands momentarily, then dissolved into threads of light that absorbed into their skin. Both Daniel and Eleanor felt the strange energy settle into their bones, a permanent connection to what had transpired. What happens now? Eleanor asked. The ceremony is complete, the Guardian replied, but the work has only begun. You must return to your world and fulfill your vow. The energy lines required decades to heal fully. Thomas and the other ghosts had begun to fade, their forms becoming transparent once more. We have guided the last Blackwood to attempt restoration, Thomas said. Our purpose is fulfilled. Will we see you again? Daniel asked his ancestor. Thomas smiled faintly. Perhaps. Not as ghosts bound to this place, but as memories properly honored. Tell our stories, Daniel. Restore not just the energy lines, but the truth of our family's history. The corporate seal descended slowly, shrinking until it became a physical object that landed in Daniel's palm, the familiar Blackwood seal. But with its new, transformed design, a token to anchor your memory when you return, the Guardian explained. The jungle distorts recollection. This will help you remember your purpose. The moonlight began to fade, the convergence of time passing its peak. The Guardian's form started to dissolve back into separate vines and leaves. Follow the compass, it instructed as it dispersed. It will guide you back to your world. The cabin will remain as a gateway should you need to return. As the Guardian vanished completely, the stone circle began to pulse with gentle light. The jungle around them whispered with countless voices speaking in unison. Go now. Return. Restore. Remember. Daniel clutched the transformed seal in one hand and Eleanor's fingers in the other as the convergence faded around them. Reality shifting like mist in morning sunlight, the architectural blueprint spread across the boardroom table bore little resemblance to conventional construction documents. Intricate geometric patterns overlaid the familiar floor plans of Blackwood headquarters, with annotations in Daniel's precise handwriting explaining energy flow modifications to be incorporated into the renovation. At the bottom right corner, the transformed company seal, the balanced tree, had replaced the old symmetrical logo. You want to knock down load-bearing walls and replace them with what exactly? Marcus Blackwood stared at his father in disbelief, his corporate polish showing signs of strain after 3 weeks of unprecedented changes at the company. Living columns, Daniel explained calmly. Vertical gardens with specific native species arranged in these configurations. He traced the patterns with his finger. The existing structure was designed to channel energy inward and upward toward accumulation. These modifications will reverse the flow, allowing energy to return to the earth. Sophia, looking equally skeptical, adjusted her glasses. And you expect the board to approve a multi-million-dollar renovation based on energy flows? The board has already approved it, Eleanor stated, entering the conference room with a stack of signed documents, as has Reynolds Group, per our new partnership agreement. 2 months had passed since Daniel and Eleanor had emerged from the jungle, forever changed by their experience at the Convergence. Their return to Chicago had sparked immediate action, Eleanor invoking the Heritage Preservation Clause, Daniel reclaiming his position not as CEO but as Chief Restoration Architect, and the announcement of a fundamental restructuring of Blackwood Architectural Solutions. The corporate world had been stunned. Financial analysts predicted disaster. Yet somehow, Reynolds Group had not only accepted these changes, but embraced them with unexpected enthusiasm. "I don't understand any of this," Marcus said, frustration evident. First, Dad disappears into the jungle. Then Mom follows him. You both return with this wild story about our great-great-grandfather's spiritual theft. And suddenly, we're transforming our entire business model. Not to mention your bizarre new partnership instead of the acquisition we negotiated, Sophia added. Reynolds Group is now funding indigenous land restoration projects. They're a commercial real estate developer. Daniel and Eleanor exchanged knowing glances. They had shared the complete truth with their children, the cabin, the guardian, the ceremony, but had met only with incredulity. Some experiences couldn't be properly conveyed through words alone. Reynolds had a change of heart, Eleanor said simply. After reviewing our proposal, they recognized the potential in becoming restoration partners rather than owners. What she didn't mention was the strange coincidence they'd discovered that Reynolds Group's CEO had indigenous Costa Rican ancestry traced to the exact region where the original Blackwood project had been built. Some connections transcended rational explanation. This isn't just about spiritual responsibility, Daniel added, addressing his children's pragmatic concerns. These modifications incorporate cutting-edge sustainable design principles. The living columns will improve air quality, reduce energy consumption, and create healthier workspaces. Sophia's legal mind sought solid ground, and the trust, transferring 40% of company assets into an indigenous-controlled restoration fund, seems appropriate, Eleanor finished firmly. Consider it back pay with interest. Marcus ran his hand through his hair, a gesture reminiscent of his father. This is still our family company. Don't we get a say in its direction? Daniel looked at his son with newfound compassion. You do, that's why you're here. We're not excluding you from the transformation. We're inviting you to be part of it. Eleanor placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder. The company has been built on extraction for 4 generations. We have the opportunity to build the next 4 on restoration. That legacy could be yours. A knock at the door interrupted them. Daniel's assistant entered, looking apologetic. Mr. Blackwood, the representatives from the Bribri Cultural Heritage Foundation have arrived for the signing ceremony. Daniel nodded. Show them in. And please use the new conference room arrangement. As the assistant left, Eleanor unfolded a small cloth bundle she'd carried into the meeting, revealing the obsidian blade from the jungle, now mounted on a simple wooden display stand. This will be presented to the foundation today, she explained to her children, along with the original land deed and full disclosure of our family's history. No more secrets. Marcus and Sophia stared at the blade, something in its ancient surface momentarily capturing their attention. For just an instant, both seemed to see something, a reflection perhaps, or a memory that wasn't quite their own. I felt something, Sophia admitted quietly. Oh, when I looked at it, Marcus nodded, uncharacteristically solemn. Me too, like recognition. Daniel and Eleanor exchanged another glance. The guardian had spoken of bloodlines and generational patterns. Perhaps the restoration would require more than just the 2 of them after all. Come to the signing ceremony, Daniel invited gently. You don't have to understand everything yet. Just witness this first step. After a moment's hesitation, both children nodded. Outside the boardroom windows, Chicago's skyline gleamed in the afternoon sun, a city partially shaped by Blackwood designs. Soon, those very buildings would begin channeling energy back to the earth. Invisible flows redirected by conscious design. Balance, slowly returning. The antique compass rested open on Daniel's palm as he stood at the edge of the newly dedicated conservation area. its needle spinning in lazy circles rather than pointing north. 6 months had passed since the ceremony at the Convergence, and he had returned to Costa Rica to witness the first tangible results of the restoration efforts. Behind him, construction crews dismantled the original Blackwood building, Robert's first project and the source of the energy disruption. Before them, indigenous elders from the Bribri community conducted a blessing ceremony, reconsecrating land that had been denied to them for generations. The compass still behaves strangely, Eleanor observed, joining him at the perimeter. Even after everything we've accomplished, Daniel nodded. The Guardian said the energy lines would take decades to heal completely. This is just the beginning. The conservation project represented the first major initiative of the Blackwood Restoration Trust. The original 5,000 acres had been returned to indigenous stewardship, with additional funding for cultural preservation and ecological restoration. What had once been a luxury hotel development was being transformed into a protected biosphere reserve. Marcus called this morning, Eleanor said, watching the blessing ceremony with respect. The Chicago headquarters renovation is ahead of schedule. The living columns are thriving, Daniel smiled. And Sophia, still skeptical about the energy flows, but fully committed to the legal framework for the trust. She's expanded the indigenous representation on the board to include elders from 3 additional tribes affected by Blackwood projects. Their children had surprised them, adapting to the company's transformation with unexpected grace once they understood the sincerity behind it. Marcus had discovered a passion for sustainable design that mirrored his father's, while Sophia's legal mind had proven invaluable in navigating the complex restructuring. The compass needle suddenly stopped its aimless spinning, pointing with unwavering certainty toward the jungle's edge. Daniel felt a familiar pull, the same sensation that had guided him to the cabin months ago. "It wants us to return," he said quietly. Eleanor followed his gaze toward the dense wall of vegetation. "The Guardian, perhaps, or the jungle itself." Daniel closed the compass with a snap. "But not today. Today we honor our commitment here." An elder approached them, a woman whose weathered face carried both wisdom and cautious hope. She introduced herself as Carmen, a keeper of traditional knowledge for the Bribri people. "The spirits are pleased," she said in accented English. "They say the energy begins to flow correctly again." Daniel bowed slightly. "We're honored to be part of the restoration. My grandfather took what wasn't his to take, and yet here you are, returning what was lost." Carmen studied him with penetrating eyes. "Few families correct the mistakes of their ancestors. Fewer still understand the true nature of those mistakes. We're still learning," Eleanor admitted. "The Trust is establishing research partnerships with indigenous knowledge keepers worldwide. The patterns Robert Blackwood exploited appear in many architectural traditions," Carmen nodded. "Sacred geometry is universal. The problem was not the knowledge itself, but how it was used to extract rather than harmonize." The dismantling crew called out a warning as they prepared to remove a cornerstone from the original building. Daniel, Eleanor, and Carmen moved to a safer distance. "We found something unusual during preliminary work," the foreman explained, approaching them with a cloth-wrapped object. "It was embedded behind the cornerstone." He unwrapped the bundle, revealing a small jade figurine, carved in the unmistakable likeness of the Guardian's mask. "Impossible," Daniel whispered, taking the artifact with trembling hands. "This building was constructed in 1884. Carmen's eyes widened in recognition. "It is the face of the Protector, a sacred symbol from our oldest stories. It should not have been here." Eleanor leaned closer. "Robert Blackwood must have placed it during construction. Or perhaps," Carmen suggested, "the jungle placed it there, knowing it would eventually be found when balance began to restore." The jade figurine felt warm in Daniel's hands, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The compass in his pocket began to vibrate in response. "May I?" Carmen asked, extending her hand. Daniel passed her the figurine. She examined it carefully. tracing the familiar patterns that matched those on the Guardian's mask. "Our stories tell of a time when worlds will realign," she said. "When those who took will return, and those who protected will be honored. Perhaps that time is now." She returned the figurine to Daniel. "This belongs with you for the moment. It has more to show you." As his fingers closed around the jade piece, Daniel felt a momentary disorientation, a brief glimpse of the cabin as it might have appeared a century ago, pristine and new, serving its original purpose as a waypoint between worlds. "We need to return to the convergence," he said to Eleanor, certainty in his voice. "Not today, but soon. This isn't just about undoing damage. It's about restoring connection." Eleanor nodded, understanding in her eyes. 6 months of working to fulfill their vow had changed them both, opening perceptions that once would have seemed impossible. Behind them, the cornerstone of Robert Blackwood's legacy was lifted away, revealing Earth that had been denied sunlight for over a century. Carmen smiled as she watched. Everything returns to balance eventually. Some journeys simply take longer than others. The family photograph sat in an elegant silver frame on Daniel's desk, capturing a moment that would have seemed impossible a year ago. Taken at the ceremonial groundbreaking for the temple restoration project, it showed the Blackwoods standing united, Daniel and Eleanor in the center, flanked by Marcus and Sophia, all four holding ceremonial shovels alongside Bribri elders and Reynolds Group executives. Their expressions reflected not just professional satisfaction, but genuine purpose. Daniel studied the photograph as he waited for his family to arrive at the cabin. 1 year to the day since he had first stumbled upon this impossible place, he had brought them back to witness the culmination of their shared journey. Finding the cabin again had required following the compass's erratic guidance, just as before. But this time Daniel had not come alone or in despair. Eleanor, Marcus, and Sophia had accompanied him willingly. If skeptically, the younger Blackwoods still uncertain about the supernatural elements of their parents' story. Despite embracing the company's transformation, the cabin had appeared exactly as Daniel remembered: the ever-burning lantern, the journals on the table, the sense of suspended time. For Eleanor, it validated the incredible experience they had shared. For Marcus and Sophia, it challenged every rational belief they held. "They're coming," Eleanor announced, entering from outside, where she had been gathering specific flowers listed in Thomas's journal. Blooms that shouldn't coexist in normal ecology, but flourished around the cabin. "Are they ready?" Daniel asked, setting down the photograph. "As ready as anyone can be to meet a guardian spirit made of leaves and vines." She arranged the flowers in the ritual bowl they had brought, not the original ceramic vessel, but one crafted by Bribri artisans specifically for this purpose. Footsteps on the cabin porch announced Marcus and Sophia's return from exploring the perimeter. They entered with wide eyes and subdued demeanors, their earlier skepticism eroded by hours in this place where normal rules of reality bent and shifted. "The stream," Marcus began, gesturing vaguely. "It really does flow uphill. And there are plants I've never seen before, species that shouldn't exist together." Sophia clutched a notebook filled with hurried observations. "And the light. It doesn't change. We've been here for hours, but the sun hasn't moved in the sky." Daniel nodded. "Time works differently here. The cabin exists at an intersection of realities. I would have called that New Age nonsense a year ago," Sophia admitted, setting down her notebook. "Now I don't know what to believe." "That's progress," Eleanor said with a gentle smile. "Certainty is often the enemy of truth." Daniel retrieved the jade figurine from his pocket, the one found in the cornerstone of Robert Blackwood's building. Over the past 6 months, it had revealed more of its secrets through dreams and sudden intuitive insights, guiding their restoration efforts across multiple continents. "It's time," he said, placing the figurine on the table beside the ritual bowl and the family photograph. "The Guardian requested all of us be present for the final ceremony." Marcus straightened his shoulders, the businessman in him still struggling with the metaphysical. "What exactly is going to happen?" The energy lines have begun healing, Daniel explained. The company's transformation is well underway. But there's one final step, acknowledging the family's role across generations, both in causing harm and in restoring balance. The bloodline that broke must be the bloodline that heals, Eleanor added, reciting words the Guardian had spoken through the jade figurine. Not just Daniel and me, but the next generation too, Sophia frowned. We didn't desecrate anything. We weren't even born when great-great-grandfather Robert built his empire. But you benefited from it, Daniel said gently. We all did, and you would have continued the pattern unwittingly. The Reynolds acquisition would have expanded the energy siphoning exponentially. Instead, Eleanor continued, you're now leading restoration efforts. Marcus's living architecture designs are being implemented worldwide. Sophia's indigenous rights legal framework is revolutionizing corporate responsibility. A sudden breeze lifted the pages of Thomas's journal, though the cabin windows remained closed. The lantern's flame stretched upward, casting elongated shadows across the walls. Outside, the ambient jungle sounds quieted to expectant silence. It's here, Daniel said softly. The jade figurine began to glow with internal light. Motes of luminescent green drifted from it like pollen, gathering in the center of the cabin and coalescing into the familiar masked form of the Guardian. Marcus and Sophia instinctively stepped back, but Daniel and Eleanor moved forward, greeting the entity with respectful nods. The Blackwood lineage is assembled, the Guardian observed, its voice resonating through wood and bone rather than air. 4 generations after the breaking, 4 members unite for healing. It gestured toward the photograph on the table. The bond captured in this image has power. Family divided caused harm. Family united brings restoration. The Guardian's mask turned toward Marcus and Sophia, studying them with its empty eye sockets. The children of betrayal have become instruments of balance, unexpected, promising. Sophia found her voice first. We're committed to the restoration, not just because our parents believe in it, but because it's right, Marcus nodded. The company's new direction feels correct, like finding a path that was always meant to be followed. The Guardians seem to grow more substantial with their words. Then we proceed to the convergence. The final ceremony awaits. All 4 bloodline carriers must participate for the healing to complete. Daniel took Eleanor's hand, then extended his other toward his children. After a moment's hesitation, they joined the circle, completing the family connection. The cabin walls began to fade around them, reality shifting like mist, as the Guardian's voice guided them toward the stone circle where everything had changed and would change again. The cycle completes, it intoned. What was broken mends. What was lost returns. The family photograph on the table was the last thing visible as the cabin dissolved around them, carried forward into whatever lay ahead. The sacred textile hung suspended in midair at the center of the convergence, its intricate weaving catching moonlight and reflecting it in patterns that matched the star configurations overhead. Created by Bribri artisans using techniques passed down for centuries, the cloth depicted the Blackwood family tree intertwined with indigenous symbols of restoration and balance. Daniel, Eleanor, Marcus, and Sophia stood at cardinal points around the stone circle, each positioned before a pillar that seemed to have been waiting for them. The Guardian moved between them, its platform more radiant and substantial than ever before. The jade mask gleaming with inner light. The final alignment approaches, it announced, gesturing to the night sky, where stars shifted into rare conjunction. What was torn asunder will be rejoined. 1 year of dedicated restoration work had led to this moment. The dismantling of Robert Blackwood's original building, the repatriation of sacred artifacts, the restructuring of the company into a force for healing rather than extraction. Each act had strengthened the energy lines, preparing them for this final ceremony. The ghosts of previous Blackwood men, William, James, and Thomas, had materialized again, but differently this time. No longer bound to the stone pillars, they moved freely around the circle, their forms more colorful and dimensional. They're not trapped anymore, Eleanor observed. They're changing, Thomas nodded, his spectral features showing peace instead of resignation. Your work has already begun releasing us. Tonight completes our journey. And what about us? Sophia asked, professional composure temporarily abandoned in this place of impossibility. What happens to our family after this? You live, William replied simply. Free from the cycle of betrayal that has haunted Blackwood men for generations. But changed, James added. Once you've seen beyond the veil, you can never unsee it. The Guardian raised its arms, causing the suspended textile to rotate slowly. Each of you carries part of the restoration. Each must contribute to the final healing. It approached Daniel first, the visionary, who recognized the corruption in his inheritance and chose a different path. Moving to Eleanor, the betrayer turned restorer, who found courage to face her complicity and work toward redemption. To Marcus, the heir who surrendered ambition for purpose, transforming competition into stewardship. Finally, to Sophia, the protector who redirected her guardianship from wealth to justice, from contracts to covenants. The Guardian returned to the center. Together, you have already accomplished what none could do alone. The company built on desecration now works toward consecration. The wealth extracted is being returned. The sacred geometry once corrupted is being purified. Then why this final ceremony? Marcus asked. What remains unfinished? The bloodline itself, the Guardian answered. The curse that has followed Blackwood men for generations must be officially ended, not just paused. The energy pattern must be permanently altered. It gestured to the textile, where golden threads began to glow more intensely. Tracing the Blackwood lineage from Robert down to Marcus and Sophia. Place your hands upon your pillars, the Guardian instructed. As they complied, each pillar began to hum with energy. The stone felt warm beneath their palms, vibrating with frequencies just beyond human hearing. Now speak your individual commitments, the Guardian directed. Not just for tonight, but for all the generations that will follow. Daniel began. I commit to using my architectural knowledge to create spaces that honor the land and channel energy properly. To teach others the difference between exploitation and harmonization. To remember always the lesson of this place. Eleanor followed. I commit to financial stewardship that values restoration over accumulation. To transparent accounting of both material and spiritual resources. To maintaining the trust that returns what was taken. Marcus spoke next, his voice gaining confidence. I commit to innovation that serves balance rather than disruption. To designs that enhance natural systems instead of extracting from them. To a business model that measures success by healing, not just profit. Sophia completed the circle. I commit to legal frameworks that recognize the rights of both seen and unseen worlds, to governance that includes indigenous wisdom, to protecting the knowledge of sacred geometry from future exploitation. As they spoke, the textile began to unravel, not in destruction but in transformation. Its threads extended outward, connecting to each family member before spreading further. Disappearing into the surrounding jungle in luminous streams that traced the invisible energy lines. The Guardian's mask emitted light from its eye sockets for the first time. The vows are accepted. The pattern is rewritten. The ghosts of the previous Blackwood men began to fade, their forms dissolving into particles of light that joined the spreading textile threads. Thomas looked directly at Daniel before disappearing entirely. Thank you, he said simply. For finishing what we could not. The Guardian's form also began to dissolve, returning to separate vines and leaves, but its voice remained. The Blackwood curse is broken. The cycle of betrayal ends. Go forth and honor your commitments, for you will be watched, not in judgment but in partnership. As the ceremony concluded, the stone circle pulsed with gentle light, one final time. The jungle around them seemed to exhale in collective relief. As if a long-held breath had finally been released, the Blackwood family stood together in the moonlight, forever changed by their journey but stronger for having taken it. Before them lay not just a company transformed, But a lineage healed, generations of past harm finally addressed, and future generations freed from an inheritance of imbalance. In the space where the guardian had stood, a single seedling now pushed through the earth, the first growth of something entirely new.